in this work we were looking at what we call geography of conflict in international river basins, but these could also be river basins which just are shared with different political constituencies. Okay? So it's need not nations, it can be cantons or states in the sense it's Indian states, whatever. Wherever you have typical upstream downstream situations, you have most often asymmetry in water endowment between the upstream and the downstream, but also you have, oh my god, I have beers, this is amazing.
Right. That time of the day.
But also you, I'm like, but also you have asymmetries in the distribution of political power and economic power, which can also critically influence allocation mechanisms. So if I grab this guy's beer, for example, I assume that I'm more powerful than him and that I can grab his share basically. But if he's more powerful than me, he can hit back, no, and I would be sort of second in line. But to depict this, the very nature of conflict in international or in transboundary river basins, you actually have to try to formalize this, the very presence of hydropolitical asymmetry. And that's what we did here. So, traditionally, it is assumed that, let's again look at the very simple case, upstream, downstream, that these agents or these riparian states, they perform optimization. So downstream, from the downstream perspective, this guy would optimize his allocation contingent on what is coming from upstream, no? And upstream is optimizing contingent on what is coming from precipitation. So not just contingent on what is coming from upstream, but also contingent on what is coming from downstream. Okay. So what we extended the traditional model of allocating water throughout such a basin, we extended that by defining a factor which is crucial determinant of the asymmetry between the national capabilities between the individual states. I'm talking bullshit. I'm not making myself understandable. So what we did really is, let's rewind. Okay. So what we did is we created a model of political conflict, hydropolitical conflict. And what that entails is that we presume that the riparian states, they solve a joint optimization problem. And what does it mean, a joint optimization problem? So if I'm in the upstream and you're in the downstream, I presume in my model of allocation, water, transport of water, that whatever I do, I take into consideration what the effect might be for you in the downstream. Okay? So this effect is expressed through an impact factor. And this is exactly the impact factor here, which we define in a very peculiar way, so that it takes into account the amount of impact which I might potentially be causing to you from my side of allocating either consumptively or non-consumptively the scarce resources in that region. And this impact factor is scaled by a gamma exponent. That's just how we understand our world. No, the gamma exponent sort of depicts the power distribution. So if gamma is large, that means that the upstream state is a powerful state as compared to the downstream. If gamma is small, then the downstream state is very powerful as compared to the upstream state. Now if we solve for optimal allocations, we can solve that optimization model using traditional stochastic optimization techniques, but what we did here is just to depict canonical cases. And for that purpose, I assume a steady state world, okay, where you have no changes in the storage, individual storage component. I assume that the change in storage over time in the upstream is 0, and the change in storage over time in the downstream is 0. And then, given that, and assuming a particular profit function on the economic side, I can actually write down the solutions of that optimization model analytically. And so what you see here, this is quite interesting. 4 prototypical solutions, assuming different worlds. In that world, you assume, this is sort of a benchmark case study, you assume that you have two countries who work perfectly together, who jointly want to maximize the profit from allocating resources across borders. So that would be really the benchmark solution. What that means here, it looks terrible, but what it basically means in words is that water no longer flows downhill, but water flows to the most economically efficient riparian state. That's basically what is written here. We have three different other types. We have the sort of traditional case where the powerful riparian state is situated in the downstream. So that's a downstream-dominated basin. That would be, for example, the situation in the Blue Nile, in the case of Ethiopia and Egypt. Okay? Egypt is in the downstream powerful, and it dictates what the upstream has to do and cannot do in terms of developing its own water resources. Well, the other case would be the upstream-dominated basin, where powerful riparian state sits in the upstream. It's like Euphrates-Tigris in the Euphrates-Tigris basin, with Turkey in the upstream and Syria and Iraq in the downstream. So that's the upstream-dominated basin. Our hydropolitical model generalizes the notion of upstream-dominated and downstream-dominated basin. And if you calculate the solution of the optimization problem as written down there, you actually see that this is a generalization of these extreme end members, upstream dominated basin and downstream dominated basin. What you see here is that the gamma, as gamma goes to infinity, meaning that the upstream state becomes infinitely more powerful than the downstream state, you recover this solution here, the upstream dominated basin solution. Whereas if the infinitely more powerful in terms of military capability, economic power, the ability to exert curse, to have some sort of influence, to exert influence on the other, is going versus zero, or is going to infinity for the downstream country, then the gamma would go to zero, and you would recover the downstream dominated basin. In all this world, what you see is that the very presence of hydropolitical conflict in a river basin is significantly impacting allocations in negative ways. Okay, so that's basically the main work. What we're doing here, we're expanding this work to have some empirical assessment of real river basin, and we also already looked at the careful analysis in the case of the Zambezi River Basin in South Africa or Southern Africa.
So how would this be used by? This
can be used in decision making, ultimately in decision making, if you presume that the real world works according, or in a way according to these principles which are depicted in this model. And so far we just put as much brain juice as we could in the development of such a model. But whether or not reality works really like this and provides such a simple way of being able to quantify these influences of the very presence of hydropolitical asymmetries throughout the basins, we don't know yet. So that's why we want to make a global study of and look at the individual river basins and corresponding upstream downstream.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. That's fine.